Greetings and welcome. We are in Junior English, and we now turn to the second of our two titles that are offered in your hymnal by Mark Twain. This one, interesting title, The Notorious Jumping Frog of Calaveras County. Now, before I get here, I want us to start in your notes on pages 568, 569. I know that on 566, 567, you've already read some information about the biography of Twain. Let's talk now more particularly about Twain as, I'm going to use some terms I want you to write down. Humorist, Twain as critiquer of social commentary. And let's talk a little bit about the significance of what it means to be a comic. To be a comic. Okay? Now, it is true that there has always been a place in American history for the comedian. For example, right now at 3B, if I were to ask you to jot down who is your favorite comedian, who would you write down? Like, who's the guy or the gal that makes you laugh? Maybe in movies, maybe in videos, something like that. Who is the one that for you think of as the funniest? Right? And right away, if I were to ask you to think about that comic or that comedian, some of you would say, probably that comic, yeah, you really can't teach much of what he or she says in school because the comic says some things that are a little bit questionable and uses language that's maybe a little bit questionable. You see what I'm saying? Okay. Commentary, social commentary is going to be a part of what we're going to speak of here. Let's start first of all by just pointing this out. Twain wants to make fun of people and their strange traits. For example, these famous quotes on 568 are some of his more ironic quotes. Look at number 7. It's better to keep your mouth shut and appear stupid than to open it and remove all doubt. One or two of my juniors saying that's advice that should be given to freshmen as they enter Worland High School. Of course, notice Twain here making the observation that human beings have a propensity towards stupidity, right? Well, that's kind of a mean thing to say. Let's point it out this way. Twain wants to use humor, making fun of, sarcasm, satire. He wants to use humor to kind of show what's wrong in many ways with American culture. Now, there's any number of times that he will do this, but the story that we're going to be looking at is one of those. Twain has a pretty negative view of human nature often. A negative view of human nature. Most people, he's going to argue, are kind of like silly or dumb. Okay? Now, I should point out that very regularly, social commentary through the form of comedy is rooted in a pretty dark, we might even say conservative strain of evaluation of a society. Right? Let me give you a few examples of how this might pan out. For example, follow this with me and see if this makes sense. If you want to make fun, for example, of a certain group of people, a number of years ago, for example, MTV had a cartoon called Beavis and Butthead. If you have not ever seen this cartoon, you can, work on YouTube and find episodes of this. Two guys, drawn really poorly in the comic strip, who basically sit on their couch and watch TV all day, and they do stupid things like poke each other in the eye with pencils and things like that. And they have a really silly kind of goofy laugh that attends their stupid actions. A colleague asked me, what do you think is going on with this Beavis and Butthead being so popular among middle school and high school, especially boys? And it was true. Just the day before, I had heard in my classroom one of my students laughing intentionally like one of these guys in this comic, they're laughing like they were idiots. And I pointed out, I said, here's the thing I'm going to speculate about Beavis and Butthead. I said, like a lot of satire, it's only funny until it's not. And he said, what do you mean by that? And I said, well, think about it. If you wanted to point out how completely inane and stupid a certain demographic of America's population is, namely middle school and 9th and 10th grade boys. One way you could do that is to write an essay about how stupid they are, publish it. Another way to do that is to go on TV and give a lecture about how stupid they are and talk about it. But a third way to do it is to just make a show about two idiot boys that sit on a couch all day long and do nothing but watch TV. And sooner or later, boys watching this show are going to go, wait a minute, oh, you're making fun of me. A guy has no life and sits and watches TV all day and does stupid stuff because he's mentally brain dead. And the minute I said the demographic figures that out, oh, dude, you're making fun of me. You're mocking me. I said the minute the demographic starts to understand that, it ain't going to be funny anymore, and the show will get dropped. And sure enough, the show did get dropped because of lack of popularity. And again, you could make the argument. Let me give you another classic example. What if you wanted to show that people are inherently pretty stupid in a lot of their life choices, but instead of writing an essay about it or saying that, all you do is to build a house, follow me, where you put cameras in every room, multiple cameras, and then you put a bunch of people inside of the house, and you simply videotape all the insane things they do, and to even more insult your audience, you call it the real world. Which is, of course, anything but real. I mean, even in the title, it's completely insulting to anybody who would be watching the show. There isn't anything about this that's real, but we're going to call it the real world. Or, for example, your classic, maybe a little closer to your generation, your Jersey Shore show, which ironically, of course, became wildly popular, especially within certain demographic of college-age boys for a very brief period of time who wanted to do nothing more than tan and lift and find girls to sleep with. But at some point, follow what I'm saying, at some point that demographic starts to realize those guys are kind of foolish. Oh, they're making fun of me. I don't want to look like that kind of person because that's kind of embarrassing. In other words, there is an argument that says that a lot of comedy in American culture is rooted behind an attempt to change the culture, to point out what's wrong with the culture, and the way you do that is by making fun of the culture. At first it'll look like celebration, the real world, but ultimately it's actually making fun. That's what I mean by saying there's kind of a dark conservative strain, a critical strain of culture, social commentary, to commentate on social issues. There's different ways that you can comment on social problems. One way to do it is through comedy. Now let's turn to Twain's classic short story of comedy. I'm with you now for this one. I'm with you on page 576. So let's go there now. 576. I hope that you have the title of this story fully written down in your notes, because it's kind of a strange title. The Notorious Jumping Frog of Calaveras County. Okay? That's the full title. Often referred to as just simply the Jumping Frog story. Okay? Now, once you've heard this story, you'll never forget it. I absolutely promise you that. Twain has the ability to kind of make you remember, for example, his great storylines. This will be a classic example. You will not forget this story. Okay? I want to say two things about this story, though, before we listen to it being read by a professional reader. The first thing I want to say is, this story is an analysis of human nature and the way people can be fooled. Right? Now, we already know a little bit about this at 3A, and I'll make this quick observation at 3A. We already know a little bit about this at 3A because in The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, for those of you that are familiar with this novel, you have this really famous moment where Tom is told, the hero of our book, young boy, Tom is told he has to paint a fence. Doesn't want to paint a fence. What to do? There he is in the early morning painting the fence when one of his buddies walks by and says, "Ha ha, you have to paint the fence." And Tom goes, "Oh, no. No. I get to paint this fence. Only very special people get to paint this fence." "Really? What kind of special people?" "Oh, nobody like you. No, 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 no. It's only people like me get to paint a fence like this. Well, I want to paint a fence. No, no, no. You cannot paint a fence like this. What did I just say? Only people like me. I have to give the go-ahead for somebody to paint a fence like this. And you definitely do not get to paint this fence. The kid goes, but I want to paint a fence. Why can't I paint the fence? Let me paint, please, please let me paint the fence. I don't know. Maybe if you give me something, I might let you. By the end of the story, Tom has figured out how to, what do we call this? Reverse psychology. And of course, when freshmen and sophomore, typically are the ones in high school who read this novel, when they read this scene, they go, oh, wait a minute. I got screwed like this when I was a little kid. My dad would say, gee, I don't know if you can pick up all that stuff off the floor. I don't know. What do you mean? I think I can. No, I don't think. I better do it. You can't do it. Right? Or somebody uses reverse psychology to get you to do something that you normally would not do at all. This is what I mean by Twain's understanding of human nature. So write that down at level 1 or 2A. And when we finish the story, we're going to ask, what does Twain kind of understand about human nature? The way our brains work, the way we're hardwired psychologically, the way people can get us to do things by telling us not to. And right now at 3B, I could have you jot down probably a moment in your own biography when you were told not to do something, and that made you all the more want to do it, and then looking back you go, oh, that's probably what they wanted me to do. Oh, I got kind of fooled into doing that. And of course, we are altogether familiar with the ways in which we can do this with other people, right? Okay. The second thing I want to point out about the story before we get started reading it is the word dialect. You want to write that down. The word dialect. Now, if you will hold your spot at page 576 and just turn back to 569 for just a second. 569. Do you see on the side of your page there, on 569, those two diagrams? It's a box and a circle. Do you see it? I hope you're looking at it. On 569, down the edge there. Do you see that it says regional dialect? Are you looking at it with me? Dialect, let's define it. The special way people talk. The special way people talk, okay? So, I will share this bit of biography just because I normally don't do this, but I'll share this because I was always fascinated by this. I was not raised in the United States for much of my life. I was raised outside of the United States. And as a young boy, when I visited the United States, I was surprised at Americans as being a somewhat strange lot of people. One of the things that I noticed early on was how important it was to Americans the way you spoke. What do you mean the way you speak? At a very young age, I understood something that's very strange about Americans. Americans in particular have a certain kind of affinity for certain types of language. Spoken English language. Right? So for example, I'll just give you a classic example. If I will begin to talk like this, you immediately assume I'm highly intelligent. Why you would think I'm highly intelligent, I cannot say. But you immediately assume I have all kinds of intelligence, when I might actually be quite stupid. On the other hand, I talk like this, y'all figure I'm about as dumb as can be. Come out there from some West Texas post town, y'all know what I'm saying? I could have a couple of PhDs, it would not matter to you at all, would it? Strange. Now Americans are like this. They will make assumptions about people by virtue of the way they talk. But notice both of the accents that I used. Hey, stay with me for a moment. Both of the accents that I used, how would you translate those in writing? I mean, if you're on video, you just have to hear me say that. If I, for example, were to right now ask you, what was the difference between the two accents that I just used? One, you might say, an English-sounding accent. The other, a more Southwestern-sounding accent. Right? Okay. But how would you represent that in writing? So that when the person reading it would know, I just spoke in a kind of British accent, and then I spoke in a Southwestern American Southwestern accent. How would you represent that in writing? This is the project of Twain, dialect. Regional dialect. That's what you're looking at on that sheet of paper. Regional dialect means trying to say something that sounds kind of like, right? So you can see there, you're going to have the regional dialect, and then in the little circle down below it, you're going to have the standard English. That would be kind of the translation. Now, here's the thing. Twain is genius at capturing the nuances of regional dialect of the West. All right? And so, as we listen to the story read, we're going to appreciate that this is a story that is told in dialect. Hello? Which is why, listen to me carefully, you definitely want to read along with the professional reader here. Don't just listen, read. Because at moments, you may not completely understand without looking at the words what those words are that you're hearing. Because the reader is going to present them in dialect. Not totally unlike the accent that I was just playing with a few moments ago. Does that make sense? Now our project is simple. At level 1, we just simply want to flow the story. First this happens, then this happens, then this happens, then this happens, and we get to the end. It's not a very complicated story. It's a pretty simple storyline. You have a character telling a story about another character, okay? So early on, you'll kind of get the sense of this. One of the early questions is, who's telling the story? So here we are. We're on 576. We're going to go ahead now and get to the story itself. Follow along. We'll pause periodically so that you can kind of get a flow of it. All right, here we go.
This Jumping Frog of Calaveras County by Mark Twain. In compliance with the request of a friend of mine who wrote me from the East, I called on good-natured, garrulous old Simon Wheeler and inquired after my friend's friend, Leonidas W. Smiley, as requested to do, and I hereunto append the result. I have a lurking suspicion that Leonidas W. Smiley is a myth, that my friend never knew such a personage, and that he only conjectured that if I asked old Wheeler about him, it would remind him of his infamous Jim Smiley, and he would go to work and bore me to death with some exasperating reminiscence of him as long and as tedious as it should be useless to me. If that was the design, it succeeded. I found Simon Wheeler dozing comfortably by the barroom stove of the dilapidated tavern in the decayed mining camp of Angels, and I noticed that he was fat and bald-headed, and had an expression of winning gentleness and simplicity upon his tranquil countenance. He roused up and gave me good day. I told him a friend of mine had commissioned me to make some inquiries about a cherished companion of his boyhood named Leonidas W. Smiley, Reverend Leonidas W. Smiley, a young minister of the gospel who, he had heard, was at one time a resident of Angel's Camp. I added that if Mr. Wheeler could tell me anything about this Reverend Leonidas W. Smiley, I would feel under many obligations to him. Simon Wheeler backed me into a corner.
All right, so here we go. Simon Wheeler is the one he's talking to. Leonidas Smiley is the one he wants to learn about. So I would write that down. Your speaker of the story is a guy named Wheeler. Okay? Now the original speaker of the story is the one actually telling and writing the story, and that we're going to argue probably Twain. Okay? So Twain goes to Wheeler and says, hey, a buddy of mine said that when you were young, there was this cat named Smiley that you knew about. There's this really interesting guy. Can you tell me about? So now Wheeler's going to tell about this guy named Smiley, and more particularly a story about this Smiley guy.
And blockaded me there with his chair, and then sat down and reeled off the monotonous narrative which follows this paragraph. He never smiled, he never frowned. He never changed his voice from the gentle flowing key to which he tuned his initial sentence. He never betrayed the slightest suspicion of enthusiasm. But all through the interminable narrative, there ran a vein of impressive earnestness and sincerity which showed me plainly that so far from his imagining that there was anything ridiculous or funny about his story, he regarded it as a really important matter, and admired its two heroes as men of transcendent genius.
Top of 577.
I let him go on in his own way and never interrupted him once. Reverend Leonidas W. Reverend Lee, well...
Alright, so here we go now. Twain is going to try to capture the southern dialect sound of Western speech. So from this point on in the story now, you've got Twain telling Wheeler's story about Smiley, but speaking as Smiley. And this Smiley cat is going to be a funny guy, all right? And again, here, a lot of comedy going on, but you're going to have to read to really follow along with this dialect stuff. Go ahead.
There was a feller here once by the name of Jim Smiley in the winter of '49, or maybe it was the spring of '50. I don't recollect exactly, somehow, though what makes me think it was one or the t'other is because I remember the big flume weren't finished when he first come to the camp. But anyway, he was the curiousest man about, always betting on anything that turned up you ever see. If he could get anybody to bet on the other side, and if he couldn't, he'd change sides. Any way that suited the other man would suit him. Anyway, just so's he got a bet, he was satisfied. But still, he was lucky, uncommon lucky. He most always come out winner. He was always ready and laying for a chance. There couldn't be no solitary thing mentioned, but that feller'd offer to bet on it and take every side you please, as I was just telling you. If there was a horse race, you'd find him flush, or you'd find him busted at the end of it. If there was a dog fight, he'd bet on it. If there was a cat fight, he'd bet on it. If there was a chicken fight, he'd bet on it. Why, if there was two birds sitting on a fence, he would bet you which one would fly first. Or if there was a camp meeting, he would be there regular to bet on Parson Walker, which he judged to be the best exhorter about here. And so he was, too, and a good man. If he even seen a straddlebug start to go anywheres, he would bet you how long it would take him to get to wherever he was going to. And if you took him up, he would follow that straddlebug to Mexico. But what he would find out where he was bound for and how long he was on the road. Lots of the boys here has seen that Smiley and can tell you about him.
All right, so let's point out, first thing he says about Smiley is, loves to bet. Always betting. Bets on everything, we're told. All right? Notice the word is feller instead